You've seen these images. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 banned the use of tear gas during wartime, along with other chemical weapons. But tear gas can be used in riot control situations. So tear gas isn't really a gas at all. It's more like a vapor, full of fine chemical dust.
It's actually a powder inside the canister, and then when it explodes, it aerosolizes into the air.
First of all, the tear gas is a very minor form of the tear gas itself. It's very safe.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you very much for joining me here again today. In the last video, we spoke about the case of Annalisa de Lazi, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it up here for you. And in that video, we spoke about how absolutely senseless her murder was. And yes, the man who did it may have been incredibly remorseful for what he had done, but like we said in the last video, he had murdered, and what is done is done. But today we're going to talk about a case that may hit home for quite a lot of people because of the age of the victims. But sadly, in South Africa, this is not the first nightclub terror that we've had in this country. But today we're going to talk about the case of the Throb Nightclub tragedy. And I stumbled across this case because a couple of friends and I were talking about some of the horrible crimes that were happening in our nightclubs. And I was wondering if the recent spate of murders and tragedies that were happening in our clubs were a kind of new thing. And I came across this case, and it is definitely not a new thing. So that rabbit hole led me down to this case. But with that being said, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Today we are heading to Chatsworth in Durban, and we are taking an exciting trip into school holidays here in South Africa, where the weather is cooling slightly, but the air is crisp, the sun is shining, and we are in May of 2000. Kids are usually super busy in the school holidays and are always looking for something extra to do. And just like I had in school, there were some events or parties that took place, basically like a party in a club or a club kind of environment, but it was during the day, it was much earlier than the general nightclub scene, and it was before the legal adults were allowed to come to the club. So in Chatsworth back in 2000, there was a popular club called the Throb Club. And this Throb Club had a daytime kind of event or party for underage kids, so basically anyone under 18. And like I said, it was held during the day, but the kids thought that this was awesome. It was something to do, and it was something like we could be like the adults kind of thing. So the kids were super excited that there's now this club and party that they're going to. There were a lot of kids that were invited, and because it was the end of term, they were very excited to celebrate. So the end of term party was ready to go. The club is pumping. The place is getting packed. And when I say packed, I mean packed. We were already over capacity in the Throb Club at about 500, 600 kids. And there were some reports that said that there were even up to 1,000 kids in this tiny nightclub. But money is money. So the more kids you let in, the more you make. So let's describe this nightclub a little bit more so that you can have an idea roughly of what a place looks like. So when you get to the Throb Club, you have the entrance, and it opens up into basically like a foyer. And then inside the foyer, there's these stairs, these tiny little stairs that head up to the first floor. And on the first floor is where the dance floor was. And in the dance floor area, which was tiny, there was like an emergency kind of exit door where you push down and it opens up. And this was in the top on the first floor. So let's get into what happened on that night. So while the kids were all partying, jumping, dancing, and socializing with each other, there were some kids that were quite near to the speakers right in front of the club where the DJ stands. And while the party's pumping, this loud bang rings out inside the club. And all of the kids that were in this confined, dark nightclub were now hit with a wave of gas that hit their faces. And in seconds, there were tears running from their face, snot running from their nose. They were coughing and trying to get this gas out of their lungs. And the reason that these kids were screaming, crying, and now trying to get out of the club was because someone let off a tear gas bomb inside the club. And they put it strategically where no one would find it and where it would make the most damage, right in front by the speakers, where a lot of the noise and kids were surrounding. So of course now the children started to panic. They tried to run out of this club. And they tried to find any exit that they could. And remember, I said that there was an emergency exit, and there was a sign that was on top of this exit. However, the exit sign was now off, and the kids couldn't see that that was where they needed to get out. And also, they wouldn't have been able to get out of there anyway because someone had padlocked this emergency exit. So, with only one way out and the only way that they knew to get out, they all had to make their way down this rickety staircase. So these hundreds of kids tried to make their way down the single staircase and out through the door. But if you have ever been to a club or an event where there is a lot of bottlenecking, this causes mass panic and mass hysteria. Experience this with adults, but it must be even worse when there are children present. So all these children are pushing and shoving each other, trying to get down the stairs. Some are tripping over each other, landing on the floor or on the stairs, and a lot of them were trampled to death. Also, the brick wall that was next to the staircase, because of the amount of pressure that was running down the staircase, this wall then collapsed and killed a lot of children as well. The youngest victim, who passed away in the Throb Nightclub tragedy, was only 11 years old. And most of the people who passed were children. And in total, 13 people passed away in this tragic event, and around 150 children were injured with varying degrees of injuries. Some had minor scratches and bruises, some having broken bones, some even having severe injuries to their nasal passages and lungs.
Tear gas doesn't just cause eyes to water. It causes a burning sensation, difficulty breathing, skin irritation, and chest pain.
It's so painful you want to keep your eyes closed. It makes people feel like they can't breathe, that they're suffocating. Sometimes it can get into your mouth and through to your stomach and causes vomiting and things like that.
One of the children who passed away was named Rory Subramani, and he was only 15 years old at the time. And what Rory did was he actually managed to get out of the club, but he heard a lot of his peers, a lot of his friends screaming and crying inside the club. So he would run in, run out, try and grab a lot of kids. But the third time that he went back into the club, sadly, that was the same time that the brick wall then collapsed, and the brick wall then landed on Rory and it broke his neck. The children who did survive made it out, but they were traumatized for life. They also ran out, gasping for air. And when the kids ran out, there was chaos that hit them there as well, because when a lot of the kids managed to get out, the police were already there. There were parents looking for children, scrambling to try and find their children, and police trying to barricade the parents to stop them from coming into this area. The police then tried to corner it all off, but it was just chaos. And the children who did survive were offered counseling sessions. And a lot of these counseling sessions that were held with the professionals, they were with consent of the children and their parents, were then handed over to the police so that the police could then build a picture of what really happened that night from different accounts from different children. They then came to a general idea of what happened. And it took around 1 year for the police to be able to collect enough evidence to then make an arrest and to put 4 different people on trial. The 4 people to be identified as responsible for the Throb Nightclub tragedy, they were Sivan Nathan Chetty. He was 38 years old at the time and married with 2 children. And Sivan Nathan was actually the co-owner of another club called the Silver Slipper. The second man to be identified as also responsible was named Vincent Pillay, and he was 28 years old at the time, and he was a bouncer at the Silver Slipper. The third man identified, his name was Dayalan Pillay, and he was 20 years old. And the last person identified to be responsible, his name was Salvan Naidu, and he was 24 years old at the time and worked as a security guard at the Silver Slipper. So the reason that these guys from the Silver Slipper decided that they were going to set off this tear gas inside this club was because the Silver Slipper was not doing as well as the Throb Nightclub, and they were running into financial loss. They were desperate for some money. So their idea was that they were going to then put this tear gas inside the club, set it off. The children would then all escape and run out. And what they would do is they would pile taxis outside, and then all the children they assumed would climb into the taxis and then go to the Silver Slipper nightclub to continue their celebrations of the term ending. So basically, they wanted to take the children out of the Throb nightclub and take them to their club so that the children would then spend their money at the Silver Slipper instead of at the Throb nightclub. But the 4 men were then all arrested, and one of the men, Dayalan Pillay, who was, remember, 20 years old, he said that he would tell the police anything and everything that they wanted to hear if he was granted amnesty and he wouldn't be charged. and amnesty was granted on the condition that he told the police everything. But then one of the survivors during the whole trial and court proceedings, she came forward to say that she was actually in the bathroom at the time that the gas went off. And she said that she came out because she heard screaming and people starting to run. And she also said, quote, "My eyes were burning. My skin felt as if something was eating it. I couldn't breathe. I was frightened and scared, and I thought that I was never going to see daylight again. The reason why I am here today is because of the deceased, and they cannot speak for themselves. I speak on behalf of them, and I just want justice done because it was not fair their lives were taken." End quote. So let's also talk about the nightclub itself before we get into the sentencing. So remember I said that the nightclub had these rickety stairs that went up to the first floor where the actual club was? Well, actually, the banister that ran down the stairs was not bolted in properly. It was always loose. And the brick wall that was built right next to the staircase was actually never built under proper regulations, and that's why it most likely collapsed. And also, I understand that there's a lot of crime in South Africa and there are always opportunists who try and get in anywhere. So I understand why the emergency exit might be padlocked during the early hours of the morning or during the day when no one is there. However, if you knew you were having an event and you knew that there would be hundreds of children or even people in your club, padlocking the emergency exit is looking for a disaster 101. And then the judge presiding over the case sentenced the three men to the harshest sentence possible, which included the conviction of all three on the counts of 13 counts of culpable homicide, 56 counts of common assault, and 1 count of illegal possession of tear gas. Sivanathan Chetty was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and sadly this was later reduced by an appeal process to only 10 years. Vincent Pillay and Salvan Naidu were both sentenced to 15 years and then 6 months each as well for the possession of illegal tear gas. Salvan and Vincent's sentences were also reduced because the judge later on found out that their test results had come back because they all went for psychiatric testing, and Salvan and Vincent's tests came back as being very low IQ. And he deemed, because of their jobs and because of their positions, that they were financially bribed by Sivanathan, and that they were in a very vulnerable spot because they were of low-income families, and Sivanathan was giving them an opportunity to earn a lot of money, and the judge presiding just thought that Sivanathan was the actual culprit and that the other two were just following blindly to be able to get more money. So Vincent and Salvan were then sentenced to 7 years behind bars instead of the 15. So after this all went down, the police in Chatsworth were given a lot of backlash for firstly allowing children to be in the nightclub in the first place, and why they failed to police a place that is meant for adults. However, other adults also felt that the police weren't entirely responsible because the club was hosting an event for young people. They were not selling alcohol, they were just hosting an event with music, and it was a safer place for children to go to, you would think theoretically, rather than doing other things and getting up to mischief. But a lot more adults swayed to the side of why were the kids in the nightclub in the first place. And Sivanathan is now released. He's a free man. They all are. And they were released around the mid to late 2000s. But Sivanathan, whenever the press talk about him or they want to talk to him about it, or even anniversaries of the tragedy is brought up by family members of those who passed away, he gets really irritated that people can't just let it rest and people can't just let it go. And he gets tired of people bringing up the past again and again to open more wounds. I get what he is saying. However, he was one of the people responsible for murdering 13 teenagers and also in injuring hundreds of others. And you also have the audacity to tell the families that are grieving and that have lost their loved ones in this tragedy to stop grieving and to stop remembering and to stop bringing up their tragedy. But this is an incredibly senseless crime for greed, basically. But let me know what you think of this case down below. I think the greed of all 4 of these men, even if the others may have low IQs, they all played a part in the tragedy at the Throb Nightclub. But I hope you all have a lovely weekend further and week further. Please stay safe out there and I'll see you again next week. Bye.